The Patterson Foundation
strengthens people, organizations, and communities by focusing on issues that address mutual aspirations, foster wide participation, and encourage learning and sharing.
All right. Well, welcome, Wendy Deming, to the Patterson Foundation's Beyond the Blog podcast, specifically the From Both Sides of the Check series. Thank you so much for being here, Wendy.
Thank you for inviting me, Andrew. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So this From Both Sides of the Check podcast is really about looking at the philanthropic sector from both sides of the check. And the idea is to talk with people that have been on both sides of the check to be able to humanize and empathize with both experiences and help paint a pathway forward for what's possible when we really partner with each other authentically and around outcomes. So I'm curious, just to kick us off, to inform the audience, can you tell us about your current role at the Bishop Parker Foundation, and how do you look at success in your role?
Sure. Okay. So I have been at the Bishop Parker Foundation for all of 4.5 months, so it's still pretty new for me. And success for the foundation at this point for me is keeping things going, making sure that our grant cycle continues, that I learn about the community as much as I possibly can. So my success metrics are different now than what they will be in a few years, for sure, just because the Bishop Parker Foundation funds organizations that serve residents in Manatee County, and most of my experience is south in Sarasota County. So I'm learning a lot in this first year being in this role. So success to me at the end of this first year is understanding the foundation, the vision of its founders, and then learning as much as I can about our nonprofit partners so that I can start understanding their work, helping to make connections where maybe there weren't any before I got there, and then to assist my board in making really strong grant recommendations or grant awards to these organizations.
Awesome. Can you share now a little bit about what you did before the Bishop Parker Foundation?
Sure.
Since we want to give the audience sort of an understanding of how you view things from multiple parts of the sector. What did you do before on the nonprofit side?
So on the nonprofit side, I spent 18 years at Gulf Coast Community Foundation in Venice, Florida. I started there as a part-time accountant, just totally dumb luck ending up in the nonprofit sector. I didn't have any intention. I always thought with an accounting degree and an MBA that I would end up in some for-profit company. So I was fortunate enough to know somebody who was leaving the foundation at the same time I was looking to find a new part-time job, and ended up there, really enjoyed what I was doing, learning more about the community. But the foundation was fairly new. It was only 5 years old when I started. And the CEO who was there at the time was leaving, and they hired a new one. And that's when the new CEO came in and that's Terry Hansen, who now leads the Brancic Foundation. When she came in, I really understood what the potential of the community foundation was. And within about 6 months of her starting, she promoted me from part-time accountant to chief of staff. So I think we both saw something in each other where it could be mutually beneficial for us to be in lockstep as partners in that organization. And one of the first things I was given the opportunity to do was help reshape the governance structure of the entity, because we know that without strong boards, you won't have strong organizations. So I learned about nonprofit governance and really how we could help our nonprofit partners, not just through monetary assistance, but through that the knowledge of understanding what effective board governance could do. So I spent 18 wonderful years at Gulf Coast Community Foundation. I ended as chief operating officer and really cut my teeth on philanthropy while I was there. Have total respect for donor intent. There is nothing more important for a foundation than honoring the intent of the donors who founded the organization. So I came to understand the importance of philanthropy through working there. But after 18 years, I think, I was ready for a change. It takes 18 years to get from kindergarten through graduating high school. And I thought it was a good time for me to go to college, per se, in my career. So there was an opportunity to become chief operating officer at Marie Selby Botanical Gardens that presented itself. And I thought, this is really unique and something different. They were just starting on a capital campaign to fund a $50+ million facility build on the campus. And it was in Sarasota, a community that I knew very well. And flowers had always been an important part of my mom and grandmother's lives. And so I thought it was a great opportunity for the next phase in my career. So it's funny, one of the first things that happened when I got there was I had always been, and this sounds silly, but it just goes to show the shock that can come when you're going from a funder role to a nonprofit role. I get there, I'm ready to work, and I turn on my computer and I find out that everything's in Google Docs. Well, I had been in Microsoft Office products my whole career, but they couldn't afford a Microsoft Office license fee. So they went with the inexpensive option in Google Docs. And that was my first aha moment. It was like, oh, you can't just go out and buy whatever you need from a technology perspective. At the foundation, we were fortunate enough to have a sizable endowment that spun off a lovely operating spend for us every year that we never really had to worry about making our operating budget. It was always planned around that spend off the endowment. So here I was in an organization, and the very first day I realized that, I'm not in Kansas anymore. This is going to be a different experience. So I quickly learned that it's not an easy job to be at a functioning nonprofit organization in a leadership role where 60+ employees depend on you to bring in enough revenue to write their paychecks. And I started at Selby Gardens in 2018, and the first 2 years were lovely and wonderful, and we were on a capital campaign. People were coming in the doors, so our operating revenue was strong, and then COVID hit. And, that was a lesson for everybody, but especially when you're running an attraction that then closes its doors and all of that operating revenue just ceases to come in. Now, we had some help from local foundations and from our donors, as well as some of the government funding, which we were able to take advantage of. But the first concern was, are we going to be able to continue to pay our team? And we did not terminate anybody during that time, which I think really was a miracle. And to add complexity to that issue, during COVID, or prior to that, we were already in talks about a potential merger with another organization in Sarasota County that was having trouble keeping its doors open. It was Historic Spanish Point down in Osprey. And we had started those conversations late in 2019. And then as COVID started hitting and we realized what was coming down the pike, we knew that if we didn't step in and take over that campus, Historic Spanish Point campus, that it was going to fold. And we didn't want that to happen. It was amazing property that was protected from development, that allowed public access to historical sites in Sarasota County. So not only were we dealing with COVID, but we also had a merger with two different organizations at a time when employees couldn't get together. So there were a lot of unique challenges that presented itself working for Selby Gardens during that time. And as we came out of COVID, we also were able to start moving on the construction project. And in an occupied campus that's undergoing major construction, trying to maintain revenues is a huge challenge. So figuring out, where are we going to get our visitors to park? How are we going to get them across US 41 in downtown Sarasota safely so that they can come to our campus? So a huge number of complexities that I never in a million years dreamed that I would be dealing with as chief operating officer, and certainly nothing that I had experienced at the Community Foundation.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, even so working with a community foundation, you sort of are in this nonprofit and funder sort of intermediary. When I talked with United Way Suncoast, Jessica Muroff, she talked about being sort of a convener. So you're in this sort of multiplicity of roles at a community foundation, and then you move on to this nonprofit side. And even though you had a picture into it working for the community foundation, there was nothing like being there, especially during a time of crisis and external emergency.
Exactly. And especially in my position at the foundation, it wasn't at all in the community leadership side. It was all in operations. So I was very much behind the scenes. I watched the community leadership team do what they do, and I watched the development team do what they did and help lead them and, work on strategies with them. But I didn't actually do that job. So I didn't have that opportunity to dive deeply into what was going on in the nonprofit world the way some of my other team members did. So definitely moving to Selby Gardens was an eye-opener for me, seeing it from a different perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how is that informing? I know you said 4.5 months.
Yes, at Bishop Parker.
At Bishop Parker.
Yeah.
But how is that nonprofit experience at Selby Gardens? How is that already informing how you're approaching your role and responsibility at Bishop Parker?
Well, it's funny you ask, because I happen to be with a nonprofit organization serving Manatee County this morning, and they were taking us around their facilities, which were tired and needed some improvements. They are serving an underserved population and certainly don't have a lot of the luxuries that some of other organizations who have a strong donor base do. And they were talking about some of the programming that they offer. And my first question to them wasn't, well, what are the impacts of those programs? And what can you tell me about how you're changing lives? It was, well, where are you finding the funding to pay for this? What does your revenue stream look like? What is your mix of revenues? What are you getting from operations? All of those things that I used to worry about at Selby Gardens, I'm now thinking first about that on these organizations. How are you keeping your doors open? Not so much, I think secondary for me now is, what is your impact? I can see what their impact is. They're in this community that desperately needs a place for people to come together and feel safe. So it came immediately to, how can our dollars help you do that better? Rather than prove to me that you're making an impact. It's visible to see that. And I think that my experience working in a nonprofit in the trenches really changed my viewpoint on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's almost like you're approaching the relationship in the organization with an implicit amount of trust with, I trust that you're doing good work and I can see that you're doing good work. But because of my experience in the trenches, I want to get down to the nitty gritty of like, how can I actually partner with you? And unless you've been on the other side, you may not sort of have that same level of appreciation of like, how are you pulling this off?
Right.
And how might I be able to partner with you to help pull that off?
Exactly. And that's a great way to put it. It's that you have that level of trust, because I went through the same thing. I know where you are. I know how challenging it is to lead an organization and to worry about the staff and make sure that you're producing the programs that people need, that people rely on you for. And I never would have put myself in that position previously and as a foundation employee. It was just a different perspective, totally different perspective. But I'm grateful for that time, because it has me looking at things so differently now in the role I'm in, especially with regards to our grant making and making sure, like we've talked about in the past, that we're not asking for things that we don't need or don't use on our decision making, and that we are having conversations before, during, and after the grant making process, so we can help these organizations know if they're a good fit for our funding priorities. And if they are, here's how you can put together an application that has the highest likelihood of being funded and that tells your story in a most compelling way.
Yeah. So now you're in your current role, and I know 4.5 months, but are there things you're already experiencing or learning in this role that you wish you had known when you were at Selby or at Gulf Coast, that you wish you could go back to your prior self and say, I wish you had known this?
Definitely, because I think that I probably have more patience now for, or more understanding of the variety of demands that are put on our nonprofit partners on a daily basis. And the deadline's a deadline. How come you didn't get it to me in time? It's those kinds of things that you don't know what anybody is dealing with in their life. And especially when it comes to running an organization that typically has severe or strict limitations on what it can do on a daily basis. So I think it's respect for what these leaders and these employees are going through, and just working together when issues come up or problems come up, and resolving those together rather than making assumptions.
Yeah. So I can hear, in talking with you, I can hear a lot of empathy for those that are working for and leading nonprofits. Flipping it back to kind of nonprofits working with you on the funder side, what do you wish more nonprofits knew about funders or people that work for foundations? Or what do you wish they knew that they may not know? Maybe they do, but
that we don't make the decisions. A lot of times we can recommend, but in my organization, it's the board that makes the decision. So I am here to facilitate and to help, and I want to hear the truth. Don't sugarcoat anything for me. Just help me understand where you're coming from, what your biggest challenges are, what your true needs are, so I can convey that to the board. You don't have to try and win me over, because chances are you probably already have. So just let's have an honest conversation about what your needs are so that I can tell that story to our board.
Yeah. I mean, I found that in my experience too, that it's really about just, particularly on the fundraising side, that when I felt comfortable sharing mistakes or challenges, funders are really receptive to that and were willing to problem solve, especially when I had already thought through, here are the things that we're doing in response to the challenges that we're going through. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it can be challenging to feel sort of safe to do that with a funder, because there's a sort of risk of like, will I not get funding, or will they think that I'm incompetent or something like that? So how are you currently in your role kind of pushing back or against that dynamic, or trying to create a space in a relationship where nonprofits really do feel comfortable talking with you?
I think in my particular role now, it's a little bit easier because I'm the new kid on the block. I have experience in Sarasota County, but not in Manatee County, not to the same extent. So a lot of the people I'm working with, I'm meeting for the first time. So there are no preconceived notions on either side. And you can start that relationship off with that honesty and hope that they reciprocate and don't feel like, I'm just saying that, but really it's a trap or something like that, mm-hmm. that it comes from an honest place of trying to do right by Ned and Patty Bishop and Mary Parker. That's my goal always.
Beautiful. Can you talk a little bit more, or not more, but can you talk a little bit about what does your dream partnership look like between nonprofits and funders? It sounds like at least a piece of it is this real open and honest communication, where it's just like, tell me your truth and let's see how we can work together. Is there anything you'd want to add to like what your dream partnership looks like?
Dream partnership probably would be one that did not have an exchange of funds every year. I think that the last thing I want to have happen is for an organization to rely on us for their existence, because that's not a good relationship. There needs to be give and take. So there might be some years where we just talk an awful lot, and there might be advice I can provide or connections that I can provide, but there might not be any funding. But there still is conversation every year. And there might be other years where they're one of our most significant grantees, just because of something that we've been working on for a couple of years and saving that up for a significant move on their part. So it really is about the relationship and knowing as much about their goals and objectives for the organization as I can, and having a really good alignment with what our foundation's goals in the community are for that particular point in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really want to pull out there like the importance of alignment. I found that when I was fundraising that like yeses or nos aren't personal.
Right.
It's really about getting really clear as a nonprofit organization about what it is that we're trying to accomplish and who can our partners be in helping us work towards that.
Right.
And if it's a no, it doesn't mean no forever necessarily. And the no typically means they're just not alignment right now.
Exactly.
And it's about seeking alignment.
Right. Right. Unless there's just a total mismatch. And let's be honest about that. And chances are you'd never get funding from us, but you're still an important part of our community. And I still want to have a relationship with you so that I can connect you potentially to somebody who can fund you.
Yeah. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what your role looks like right now. Because I think sometimes people are these like mysterious boxes of like, what do they do? Could you tell us in your 4.5 months, what's your favorite part of your job so far?
Oh, days like today where I'm out in the community all day and finding out what people are doing, the challenges that they're facing, learning more about the community. I feel just really excited. I will go to bed thinking tonight about where we can really have an impact in a much needed area of our community based on what I learned today. So I love meeting with people. I'm really enjoying learning the community. I've already tried to make connections between people, and they're grateful because so many of them, as anybody who's run a nonprofit or been involved in a nonprofit knows, you're not working 40 hours a week. You're working a lot more than that. And you're so focused on the day-to-day needs that establishing those partnerships sometimes is towards the top of that hierarchy of needs that you never, ever get to. So if I can do that and provide that to some of these organizations, then I feel like I'm doing my job. So that's my favorite kind of day is learning more and then making connections based on what I've learned.
Absolutely. And I think it points to one of the unique values of like a funder vantage point is sometimes when you're working for a nonprofit, you can be really focused on your nonprofit. And sometimes not, sometimes. And I think really strong nonprofits and nonprofit leaders are really looking at things from an ecosystem perspective. But it can sometimes be easier to do that on a day-to-day basis when you're working for a foundation and you're really thinking about the entire community and all these program areas and how they're interacting with each other.
Exactly.
And so it sounds like you're really tapping into that.
It's fun.
Yeah. So, okay, what about your least favorite part of the job so far?
Oh, having to tell people they didn't get funding. Of course, that's sad because I never want to say no, but I try to do it in a way that lets them know it's not about their ask. It's just about funding limitations. You know, we give away a certain amount every year and it's a drop in the bucket compared to what our community needs. So there's no way that we can meet what everybody needs. So they have to pick and choose. And unfortunately, that means saying no to some.
Yeah. Was there anything else related to this topic that you think would be valuable to share before we finish up?
Based on what I've learned in my vast experience, I think that any person who works for a foundation should spend a couple of years working in a nonprofit. I really firmly believe that because I don't think that I know I didn't fully understand the challenges and complexities that our funded partners face on a daily basis. And having been there for 18 years, I just look back and think of even more of a difference I could have made if I had that year sabbatical or whatever you want to call it, where I took a break from the foundation, went boots on the ground in a nonprofit, and then could come back. It would have made a difference in the way I approached my work. So I strongly encourage anybody who's been at a foundation, whether it's a community foundation, private foundation, what have you, for a significant part of their career, if they haven't had that opportunity to seek that out. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Wendy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, and appreciate talking with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Listeners, thanks for joining us beyond the blog.